Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really getting into the source material on one of the most talked about, most scrutinized criminal cases in recent U.S. history, the Laci and Connor Peterson case.
Yeah, it really gripped the nation. And it wasn't just, a local story. It ended up having these huge ripple effects, even changing federal law.
Absolutely. So our goal here for you is to get you quickly up to speed, really understand the key timeline points, the big twists like the affair coming out.
Right. And the trial itself, which was, complicated by being mostly circumstantial evidence, and then that major legal impact, the creation of Laci and Connor's law.
Exactly. So let's just set the scene first. Who was Laci Peterson? She was 27 years old, living in Modesto, California, married to Scott Peterson.
And importantly, she was pregnant. Very pregnant, actually, expecting their first child, a boy, Connor, due in February 2003. Typical expectant family.
Just a normal family looking forward to a baby until everything changed.
Right up until that moment.
And that moment was Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2002. Laci's reported missing from their home. And right away, the focus shifts, naturally, to the person who last saw her, the person who can give that initial timeline, her husband, Scott.
That's the starting point, yeah. Scott's story, his alibi right from the beginning, was that he last saw Laci that morning before he left to go fishing. Solo fishing trip.
Okay, fishing. Where did he say he went?
He said he drove about 90 miles away to the Berkeley Marina.
90 miles on Christmas Eve morning. For fishing, did that immediately seem odd? What about his behavior raised flags so early on, even before, physical evidence?
Well, yeah, the alarm bells went off almost instantly, not just for police, but for the public watching.
Huh?
The fishing trip itself, it felt a bit off. Unusual day, long drive, and he wasn't exactly known as this huge fishing enthusiast.
Right.
But it was more than the alibi. It was his demeanor. You had this massive search effort kicking off. Hundreds of people, family, friends, volunteers out there looking.
All the huge community response.
Huge. But Scott's participation, observers consistently described it as, cold and detached. He just didn't seem to show that frantic worry or desperate involvement you'd expect.
Yeah, it's striking how often in these cases that perceived lack of grief or the wrong kind of grief becomes so powerful in the public eye, sometimes more than early evidence.
Exactly. It creates a narrative. And with Laci missing, that perceived coldness, which was amplified by this huge media frenzy that sprung up, it gave investigators a sort of psychological angle they felt they had to pursue.
Okay, so they're pursuing that angle. And that leads pretty quickly, actually, just a few weeks later in January 2003, to this massive turning point, the affair.
Yes, the affair with Amber Frey.
Yeah.
That completely changed the game. And what's really key here is how it came out. It wasn't just police digging. Amber Frey came forward herself.
She realized the man she was dating, Scott, was the husband of this missing pregnant woman everyone was talking about.
Precisely. She put two and two together and went straight to the police.
And she didn't just talk, she agreed to help them.
She did.
Yeah.
Full cooperation. She allowed the police to record her phone calls with Scott after she came forward.
Wow. So investigators got to hear him in his own words.
In real time, continuing to lie to Amber, spinning tales about where he was, pretending he was traveling overseas sometimes while Laci was still missing. It provided this incredibly valuable insight into his deception, evidence the prosecution would later use very effectively.
That cooperation must have really pushed things forward. But the absolute confirmation, the physical evidence, that still took months.
It did. That was the absolutely devastating discovery in mid-April 2003, April 13th and 14th. The remains of Laci and of baby Connor were found washed ashore in the San Francisco Bay.
The San Francisco Bay. And if we connect that back, that location must have been just devastating for any defense Scott might have been planning.
Oh, it was almost a fatal blow to the defense narrative because the bodies were found near the exact area where Scott had consistently told police he went fishing that day. Laci disappeared.
The Berkeley Marina area?
Right near there. It just closed that loop. It geographically linked Scott to the disposal site near the time she went missing. It didn't prove how he did it, but it put him right there.
A chilling connection. And just days after that discovery, the investigation culminates in his arrest, April 18th, 2003, down in San Diego. And the details of that arrest are pretty wild, right? They suggest more than just being caught off guard. It points towards flight. Panic.
It really raises questions about consciousness of guilt, absolutely. When they picked him up, he wasn't just, going about his day. He looked different. He'd grown a goatee, bleached his hair blonde.
Changed his appearance?
Significantly. And what he had with him was even more telling. A large amount of cash, something like $15,000, multiple cell phones, camping gear, lots of clothes. and his brother's ID.
Whoa, wait. His brother's ID, not just his own. That little detail seems highly suspicious. Like planning, not just panic.
Exactly. I mean, why else carry your brother's identification? For the prosecution, this wasn't just random stuff. It looked like a kit for starting over, maybe fleeing the country under a different identity.
Makes sense.
So you combine the bodies found near his fishing spot with these preparations for escape. The prosecution felt they had a very powerful, even if largely circumstantial, case pointing squarely at Scott.
Okay, so he's arrested. The stage is set for the trial. It starts in 2004, moved to Redwood City because of all the pretrial publicity in Modesto.
Right.
Huge media attention.
Given that intense media spotlight and the fact that the evidence was circumstantial, no smoking gun, no eyewitness to the murder itself, how did the prosecution build their case?
They really focused on painting a complete picture, connecting all those circumstantial dots. The core argument was pretty straightforward. Scott killed Laughlin at home, maybe on the night of the 23rd or morning of the 24th. He then created the fishing trip as an alibi.
A cover story? Exactly. A cover to drive her body, likely in his boat, which he'd recently purchased, out to the bay and dump it. They use his lies to Amber Frey, his strange, unemotional behavior after the disappearance, the internet searches he'd made about currents in the bay.
And the items found during his arrest?
And the arrest evidence suggesting flight. They piled it all up to say, look at the pattern, look at the lies, look at the location.
So how did the defense possibly counter that? What was their strategy against this mountain of circumstantial points?
Their main strategy was to hammer on exactly that it's circumstantial. They kept repeating.
Yeah.
There's no direct evidence. No murder weapon was ever found. No witnesses saw him harm Laci. No definitive forensic evidence tied him directly to the murder inside the house.
So reasonable to doubt based on the lack of direct proof.
That was the core. They also tried to float alternative theories. Maybe Laci was abducted. They vaguely suggested a connection to a nearby burglary that happened around the same time, or even some sort of satanic cult, though there was really no evidence for that.
Kind of throwing things at the wall to see if anything stuck, maybe.
Perhaps. But ultimately, the jury didn't buy those alternative theories. The weight of the circumstantial evidence, particularly the location of the bodies, was just too strong.
Right. So the verdict comes down November 12, 2004. Tell us about that verdict, and specifically the two different charges. That seems important.
Very important. The jury found Scott Peterson guilty on two separate counts. First-degree murder for Laci Peterson, and second-degree murder for their unborn son, Connor.
Okay, why the difference? First degree for Laci, second degree for Connor. What does that distinction mean legally?
It reflects the legal requirements for proving intent and premeditation. For first-degree murder of Laci, the jury had to believe Scott planned her death beforehand, that it was premeditated and deliberate. For Connor, the second-degree verdict likely came under California's fetal homicide law at the time. It essentially meant they believed Connor's death occurred during the commission of Laci's murder. The primary intent was to kill Laci, and Connor died as a direct result of that felony act, but perhaps without specific, separate premeditation proven for Connor himself.
So, two convictions stemming from that one horrific event. And that led initially, in December 2004, to the death sentence.
Correct. He was sentenced to death. But, as often happens in these complex cases, that was far from the end of the legal road. The appeals have been going on for, well, almost 2 decades now.
And there was a major development fairly recently, right, in 2020?
Yes, a very significant one. The California Supreme Court overturned Scott's death sentence.
Overturned it completely. Why? Did they find new evidence?
No, it wasn't about new evidence or his guilt. It was about the process of selecting the jury for the original trial, specifically the voir dire process, where they questioned potential jurors.
Okay, what was wrong with the jury selection?
The Supreme Court found that the trial judge had improperly dismissed some potential jurors. These were people who expressed general objections or reservations about the death penalty on their questionnaires, but they hadn't been questioned enough to determine if they could actually put those feelings aside and follow the law as instructed.
Ah, so a procedural error in ensuring the jury could fairly consider a death sentence, even if they personally had doubts.
Exactly. It's a specific legal standard for death penalty cases. Because of that error, the death sentence couldn't stand. But, and this is crucial, the court explicitly upheld the guilty verdicts for both murders.
So the convictions for killing Laci and Connor still stood firm. They just needed to resentence him.
Correct. The state had the option to retry the penalty phase with a new jury or accept a sentence of life without parole.
And they chose the latter.
Yes. In December 2021, Scott Peterson was formally resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
And he's still appealing.
Oh, yes. The defense has continued to file appeals, even into 2022 and 2023. They've raised issues like alleged juror misconduct, claiming a juror lied on her questionnaire and other supposed irregularities. But so far, none of those efforts have succeeded in overturning the convictions themselves. He's currently serving that life sentence.
Okay, so that covers the case itself, but let's shift to the so what, the broader impact. This case wasn't just a courtroom drama. It really resonated nationally, sparked debates.
Absolutely. Debates about media influence, the death penalty itself, sure. But the most concrete, lasting legacy is legislative. It directly led to a change in federal law regarding unborn victims.
Right, you mentioned Laci and Connor's law.
That's what it's known as.
Yeah.
Officially, it's the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, passed by Congress and signed into law in April 2004, remarkably quickly after the case unfolded.
What did that law actually do? Weren't there already laws against harming a fetus?
There were in many states, yes, including California. But the laws were inconsistent across the country, and importantly, there was a gap at the federal level. Before this act, if a federal crime was committed, say, kidnapping across state lines or an assault on federal property and a pregnant woman was harmed, the unborn child often wasn't recognized legally as a separate second victim under federal statutes.
Ah, okay. So this law created that separate federal recognition.
Precisely. It established that if you commit one of over 60 existing federal violent crimes and you cause the death or injury of an unborn child, you can be charged with a separate federal offense for that harm to the fetus. It doesn't require proving the attacker knew the woman was pregnant, just that the unborn child was harmed during the commission of a listed federal crime.
So it essentially defined the unborn child as a potential second victim in federal cases.
Yes, it allows for separate charges, separate convictions, potentially additional penalties. It was a significant shift in federal law, directly spurred by the immense public focus on the loss of both Laci and Connor.
It really is incredible to trace that line. A local missing person case in Modesto explodes into this national media obsession, goes through years of legal battles, and ultimately results in a fundamental change to federal law, all within just a couple of years.
It's a really stark example of how a single, deeply tragic and highly publicized case can galvanize public opinion and exert immense pressure on lawmakers. That emotional connection the public felt to Laci and Connor created this political momentum that led directly to Laci and Connor's law.
It definitely makes you think about that connection. Well, thank you for walking us through all the twists and turns, the evidence, the trial, and that lasting legal legacy of the Laci and Connor Peterson case.
My pleasure. And maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. How often do we see major legal or policy shifts happen not because of some long-term strategic plan, but because of the intense emotional spotlight generated by one specific, devastating human story? That dynamic, that interplay between tragedy, public fascination, and legislative action is powerful, and it's exactly what cemented Laci and Connor's law into federal statute.